Okay. Oops. Test. Yeah.
Our next speaker is Father Andrew Dalton. He's Assistant Professor of Theology at the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum in Rome. He bridges the scientific discovery and theological insight on the Shroud. He holds a postgraduate certificate in Shroud Studies from the International Center of Synodology in Turin and teaches at the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum. A global speaker on the Shroud of Turin, he has lectured across Asia and serves on the board of Athonia promoting Shroud research. He authored a recent book, Fulfilled Israel, Matthew's Pleurosis Paradigm. Let's welcome Father Andrew Dalton.
I started to say, you guys are troopers. It's 7 o'clock at night. You're still gluttons for punishment here tonight. Or maybe we just have mutual love for a dear friend, Barrie Schwortz. And it's my honor to mention this friend of mine. I want to tell a personal story before I let Barry's own voice shine, because there's something irreplaceable about Barrie. Those who know anybody here know Barrie in real life, look at all of you. Wow, I think he must be smiling to see so many of his friends gathered in one place. Barrie was such a magnetic personality, and I know everyone who knew him loved him. And I want to just share a personal story of how I met Barrie, and then, like I said, I want to share something of his own voice. I was a seminarian at the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum, and I had been tasked with guiding pilgrims in our Shroud exhibit downstairs. You know, they needed somebody for each language. Hey, who speaks Portuguese around here? Okay, you're in. Who speaks French? You're in. Okay, wait, Andrew, you speak English? Okay, come on, go study this thing. And so I was kind of like just shoved in the room. In any case, I have a dear friend, Father Rafael Pascual, many of you know. He's the coordinator of Athonia and the one who brought it into being alongside Father Hector Guerra. Father Hector Guerra, also a very dear friend of Barrie Schwortz. So here's how my story intersects with theirs. Father Pascual invited me to a talk with this Italian expert on the Shroud. And her name is Emanuela Marinelli. I know many of you here know Emanuela, but she was like the first Shroud expert that I came to meet. And I really didn't want to go because, I had better things to do. What am I going to do? Talk about the Shroud for an hour and a half? I mean, certainly after 10 minutes, you've exhausted all there is to say, right? And Emanuela, she can chat, and keep on going all day, every day. She's amazing. And it was particularly on iconography. So an area I certainly know nothing about. I was so riveted by the evidence that she was presenting just on this rather tangential portion of Shroud Studies that I said, I'm not leaving anytime soon. I stayed after talking to her. She said, you think this is great? Come back next week. It's going to be Paolo Di Lazzaro. I've heard his name mentioned many times over the course of these days. And she wasn't wrong. He came back a week later, and Paolo spoke on the physics. And this is more my language, to be honest, because I studied at Georgia Tech. My strong subjects in school were always maths and sciences. And then God called me to the priesthood, and I left all that for many, many years. But it's kind of fun to dabble in those things anyway. And so Paolo is a rare find to have someone who is scientifically minded and also very interesting and passionate to listen to. Like some of you are here. And that's a rare breed. It's a special gift to have the gift to communicate and to have a passion for it. It's not just number crunching. And if you know Paolo, you know what I mean. And so I stayed talking extra with Paolo, and he said the same thing as Emanuela. He said, you think this is good? Wait till you come back next week, because it's Barrie Schwortz. And they wasn't wrong. So Barrie Schwortz didn't stay for just one conference, but for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, every single day at this pontifical university, every afternoon, he was in his, in Spanish they say, in his salsa. That was it. He was in his sweet spot. He was so happy to be at a pontifical university, sharing with priests and future priests about this burial shroud of Jesus. Oh, he thought that was something special. So I got to pick up Barrie from the airport when he came in. So I was I was just a student, interested to go to his lectures and meeting him for the first time. And we became friends. So I'd go to all of his lectures, but then we'd also go out for pizza and in his smoking break hang out. And he was an endless source of storytelling. Endless. And everything he had to say was packed in a story, and it was just so entertaining to listen to. And I loved it. And we became quite close in just the span of 2 weeks. And so then for many years, every other year, Barrie would come to Rome, and he would teach at the Othonia's postgraduate certificate in Shroud Studies. Of course, he was the specialist of STURP, the Shroud of Turin research project. And for every single area of science, he was going to tell you how he met this person and what he was like. And he always shared those personal elements from his own life, including about his cat and his loved ones, and especially in the down times when he wasn't in front of the camera. So when I'm going to fast forward to one particular moment when Barrie was called upon to speak at the Via della Conciliazione. This is the main strip that heads right at the facade of St. Peter's. Father Hector Guerra, one of his last great works related to the Shroud, in addition to creating the Shroud Museum and founding the certificate at a pontifical university. After he had befriended Barrie, even going to his house in Colorado, Barrie would always say, Father Hector was coming to check me out to see if I passed muster, and sure enough he did, because he got the job, And so Barrie was called upon to be one of the keynote speakers at a TED Talk. It was a TEDx. Have you heard about these, right? So they had, what was it, Gloria Estefan. There was some NBA player that's 7 feet tall. There was some brother astronomer, Brother Lawrence, I think was his name, and Barrie Schwortz, the Jew who believed in the Shroud, So, and he got his, what do you get, 17 minutes to package your, so you should see it if you've not seen it. Signature Barrie Schwortz is his TED Talk in front of the Vatican's, prime real estate there. He was happy as a kid in a candy shop. So let's let Barrie's voice. I want to thank Father. So Paolo Di Lazzaro sent me his testimonial just in December 11th of last year. We had a kind of remembrance of Barrie, and it was a beautiful tribute, right? 4 people on the panel, remembering his story, remember his life and legacy. And I shared a few words. Paolo Di Lazzaro, I think, did a wonderful job, a wonderful tribute with all these pictures. But I could hear Barrie's voice in the back of my mind. I remember his ways, and not everybody has that in their memory bank. And I thought I'd read this short testimonial in his own words. This is from 2010, but I think his personality really comes out, and so much of his specialness. I don't know if you would know this, but this is The Shroud of Turin Changed My Life by my friend, Barrie M. Schwortz. I felt there must be a reason why I, a Jewish photographer, got to witness the Shroud of Turin up close. It took me about 20 years to understand. I was a young photographer with a commercial studio in Santa Barbara, California, when I was asked to photograph a subject that would change my life. Oops. And mine just ran out. I'm going to have to use yours. So I'll have to do it from here. Can we scroll to page 72? That's weird. It was It was the 1970s, and I just finished working on a consulting project at Los Alamos National Laboratory when one of the men I worked with asked me what I knew about the Shroud of Turin. The shroud? I knew only a little bit about the cloth that was said to bear the image of the crucified Jesus. Personally, I thought the image was probably a painting. Even so, he told me that a group of researchers were putting together a team to go to Turin, Italy, to study the shroud and determine how the image was imprinted on it. They needed the services of a professional photographer, he said, and asked if I'd like to take part. My first thought was, I'm a Jew. Although I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home and God was part of everything every day, I hadn't thought about my faith since I was a kid. But my friend told me that the Shroud of Turin research project, STURP, was about science, not religion. The shroud image, he said, contained encoded information that yielded a natural, three-dimensional relief of a human form. I knew that wasn't true of normal photographs and artworks, so my interest was piqued. Still, I felt uncomfortable working with such an important Christian relic. When I asked a friend, the late Don Lin, the imaging project manager at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, and later head of the STURP imaging team, what he thought, he replied, "Have you forgotten that the man in question was also a Jew?" Barrie would quote this endlessly, this story. Then, you don't think God would want one of his chosen people on our team? Me, I thought. I'd made the decision to stop practicing my faith right after my bar mitzvah at age 13. As a young boy, I had observed what I felt was hypocrisy and was offended by it. After that, I simply hadn't thought about my faith until now. I'd never really thought of it that way, I replied. Although I was sincerely interested in certain properties of the shroud's image, deep down, I still... Can you help me? Scroll to 73. Deep down, I still expected that they would bring us the shroud and we would find the paint and brushstrokes and go home. On October 8th, 1978, at the end of a 5-week public exhibition, the shroud was brought into the Royal Palace for our team to examine. As soon as the 14.5-foot long burial cloth was unveiled, I pulled out my high-powered magnifier and took a very close look, my face only inches from the straw-colored cloth. I noted the subtle ventral and dorsal images of a crucified man, only slightly darker than the background. I saw a face that reminded me of a rabbi I knew when I was young. Bloodstains that amazingly were still red, and severe burns and scorches on the cloth from a 1532 fire. After about 2 minutes, I stood up with the realization that I was going to have to change my way of thinking. There was no paint on the shroud. Help me. From that, can we scroll down? There's Barrie with his hair. He would always laugh. He's like, why am I not in any of these pictures? He's like, because I'm taking all of them, right? Barrie, all those STURP beautiful pictures that you've seen, Barrie's behind it. He would like to tell how he was, you know how it lasted for 120 hours? He would say, I was in the room for all of them except 8. He's like, I can sleep later. Now I get to study the shroud. Okay, from that day forward, Barrie says, I knew I had to keep an open mind about this ancient cloth and the image it bears. We spent 5 days and nights gathering data and subjecting the cloth to a wide variety of tests because we literally worked around the clock. We had no time to contemplate the significance of what we were doing as we did it. I knew that some of the other team members had been deeply moved, but for me, that feeling wasn't to come for a long, long time. Quote, God doesn't always let us know in advance what the plan is, I recall Don telling me during the time I questioned my role on the research team. I should do the best job I could, Don said, and worry about it later. One day, he said, you'll know. I made thousands of photographs of the event and many hundreds of the shroud itself. For the next 3 years, The STURP team studied and evaluated all of their data, met regularly to review the details, and by the end of 1981, revealed their formal conclusions. The shroud was not a painting or a medieval photograph, but we couldn't say how the image was made. The answer remained elusive, and the shroud remained a mystery. STURP's work was finished, yet I felt that somehow I was not. I had all these materials in my possession that were important to so many people, but what was I supposed to do with them? I was unconsciously nagged by a guilt I couldn't explain, a feeling that I had not truly fulfilled the obligation that came with the privilege I had been given, to give the rest of the world a glimpse of the ancient cloth. I felt connected to it, and as the years passed, I was compelled to stay abreast of research on the shroud without really understanding why. He would repeat this often. Now I know why I was in the room. Not for me, but for you, he would often say. In 1988, I was shocked when radiocarbon dating tests confirmed with 95% certainty that the shroud was manufactured sometime between 1260 and 1390. Headlines claimed, "Shroud is a fake," and much of the world closed its doors on the accumulated scientific evidence that proved the shroud existed well before 1260, and the linen was manufactured using an ancient method that was no longer in use by the medieval era. By 1995, the last question in my mind that challenged the shroud's authenticity was answered, and interestingly, by another Jewish researcher, the late Alan D. Adler. The reddish color of the blood on the shroud had always been a problem for a number of us on the team. Old blood usually turns black or dark or brown. Adler, a world-renowned blood chemist, explained to me that someone suffering torture over an extended period of time would go into shock. The red blood cell walls would start to break down and the liver would flood the bloodstream with bilirubin. Under those circumstances, the blood would remain red forever. That was the last piece of the puzzle, and I was finally convinced. But my nagging question remained. What do I do with this knowledge? One day, Don had said, you'll know. Again and again, Barrie would come back to this question of the bilirubin in the blood, right? He said it was the straw that broke the camel's back. He was hesitant to embrace the idea that the shroud was the authentic burial shroud of Jesus. And he liked to hang on to all the data that pointed in that direction. And he just felt like it was dwindling away over time the more he studied. And he was hanging on to this one last piece of evidence. And then his Jewish friend, told him about the bilirubin and its effect to keep blood red. And he said, what else can I cling to? And so he would then, from then on, affirm that it was Jesus. Just remind of one little detail. Barrie, do you know he would wear a medal around his neck? And that the image was the image of the man of the shroud. That's how close he held it to his heart, right? And so sometimes when we think about what this means to him, I always thought that gesture spoke eloquently and profoundly about who this man was for him. He would say that he thought it was a great example of heroic charity. A friend called and told me that Leonardo da Vinci had created the shroud. He would use that line a lot in his lectures too. There was a National Geographic that used this as a kind of a running motif. And so he had fun playing with that one again and again. Here we pick up his text. In 1995, two things happened that changed everything. First, a friend called and told me that Leonardo da Vinci had created the shroud. He said he saw it on the cover of a tabloid at the grocery store. Well, there it is. It was then that I had an epiphany. For the first time, I realized how little the public actually knew about the shroud, and how little accurate information was even available to them outside of obscure scientific journals. The mainstream media was not being very honest about it, and it was far more interested in debunking the shroud than in telling the truth. Typically, researchers' findings are released to scientific journals for evaluation and peer review. But when one researcher recently claimed he had duplicated the shroud using medieval pigments, for instance, his claim was picked up by more than 350 media outlets. Even though his research was funded by an Italian organization of atheists and agnostics, the man's claims received widespread attention. The second thing that changed everything was my discovery of the internet. While I was still talking to my friend about Da Vinci, I jotted a note on the manila folder on my desk. Consider building a website. This would be the perfect way, I realized, to share with the world my photographs and the knowledge I'd accumulated about the shroud over the years. Before I go on, I just want to pause and remember how so many of you have said to me that a line I once gave in an interview with Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas was expressing exactly their sentiments. I said this, and it's what Barrie reflects here in a similar way. When I went to that first lecture with Emanuela Marinelli, and I walked out of the room saying, how am I 10 years a seminarian and I've never heard about these things? You see how true it is that it's hard for the general public to have access to what Barrie knew he was privileged to be privy to. And so I agree, and I think those of us who have learned about the shroud feel the weight of that it's not just us, but it's for everybody else. We bear it as a burden to share it, and Barrie felt that too, very, very intensely, very personally. Let's pick up where he left off. On January 21st, 1996, before the internet was barely a thing, right? Barrie was getting into this. Shroud.com went online. The public response was immediate and positive. Over the years, the website has grown into the largest online resource about the Shroud of Turin and reached more than 10 million viewers. I've written countless articles and have published hundreds of papers on the site by scientists, researchers, biblical scholars, historians. Publicity from the site has helped me to travel the world, lecture in churches, universities, appear in television documentaries, and co-author a book. But more importantly, the site and its visitors forced me to look at the faith I'd pushed aside for so long. Once I publicly stated that I believed the shroud was authentic, people started asking me what I believed in. I didn't have a clue. For the first time in my adult life, I was forced to confront my own beliefs. Doing so did not make me a Christian, nor did it convert me into a Messianic Jew. I am a Jew with a deep faith in the one God, a God who had been with me all along, just waiting for me to find him. I would never have realized that were it not for my involvement with the Shroud of Turin. God truly works in mysterious ways. I now understand that my purpose for being on the STURP team was far less about the photographs I made in 1978 and far more about the accurate information about the shroud that I began bringing to a worldwide audience using the internet some 20 years later. In sharing this information, I've finally begun to fulfill the obligation that came with the privilege I was given. Don Lin was right all along. Can we just give a round of applause to our friend Barrie Schwortz? It's so true what he gave to a worldwide audience. Do you know, this is, I believe, his great merit. At a time when it was so rare, Barrie was a diplomat. Barrie was a friend. Barrie was a gentleman. Barrie knew how to receive everyone, to listen to everyone, and to scrutinize in a way that was serious and scholarly. And so he'd publish everything, even the things he didn't agree with. If it was on a peer-reviewed journal article, he wanted it on Shroud.com. If there were competing theories, he was going to platform them, and he was going to foster the ongoing conversation. I always love the stories. You might have your own opinions about the French invisible weave, but either way, this is just a great story and a little insight into Barrie. Okay, so you know the story of Ray Rogers, right? how he calls up Barrie Schwortz after Sue Benford gave this wonderful paper at Oviedo. I always get this wrong. Oviedo is in Spain. Orvieto is in Italy. So in Italy, yes, Sue Benford gave a paper defending French invisible weave. Such a great story. So she's watching TV, I'm told, and sees, Joe, you can fill us in the details if I get anything wrong, okay? So, and sees the image of the man of the shroud and is convinced that this is the real deal, or this is worth probing into further. Obtains an image of the man of the shroud and now shows it to textile experts who, without even knowing what they're looking at, see evidence for a reweave, an invisible weave. There's a misalignment in the natural patterns, in the regular patterns of the weave, or so she's told. And so she presents a paper presenting this idea that the shroud is a composite of mostly first century material, but in that top left corner contains now 16th century material, new cotton fibers that would skew the carbon dating. And you can press deeply into the science. That's really not my point in this moment. This paper, following the scientific method, is proposed at a time when this theory is not widely known or accepted. And Barrie says, I want it on shroud.com. And so it is that it's published. That's the gracious spirit that I think he was constantly showcasing. I think we would do well to remember that. And so this is when he gets a funny phone call from head chemist, or Ray Rogers. What are you doing publishing this paper from the lunatic fringe? You know, I mean, just the hubris of academia comes shining through a phrase like that. And he's like, well, Ray, I think she followed the scientific method. I think it's a worthwhile hypothesis. People ought to know what's out there, be able to engage it, and, respond. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. He said, I'm going to prove her wrong in 5 minutes. He said, well, Ray, go ahead. Keep the conversation. You're free to do your stuff, too. So they hang up the phone. Apparently, something like 90 minutes later, when he gets a phone call back and says, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think she's right. Because I found cotton in the fibers of linen. And you might know the stories of what later findings the Jet Propulsion Laboratories at Los Alamos found with the intersection of the fibers, where a plant gum is seen to have been applied to certain fibers, but a white band right down the middle seems to suggest that that plant gum didn't reach into all the nooks and crannies, and so not that kind of proof that there's some additive, some coloration that was brought into this portion of the material. And so I love to tell that story as to showcase not only an interesting theory that I think people ought to know about, but also to see the graciousness and the scholarly attitude and the diplomatic disposition that Barrie had. We have seen, and Barrie was living in the midst of it, a time period where there was a lot of, dare I say, atomization among scholars, schools that were so competitive they dare not speak to each other, where the other was persona non grata, right? And what, I can't even listen to their theory? as if because I disagree with your theory, I can't be friends with you? Barrie was allergic to such a thing, and I think we should be too. So this is what I think Barrie had very much in common, by the way, with Father Hector Guerra and Father Pascual. And so it began the seed of a new day in Shroud study, where people could actually come together and discuss and debate and give voice to a larger conversation that, all can partake in. And so a university, a pontifical one, where all could be welcome. It has not been easy, right? And sometimes you have a kind of feudal attitude that reigns supreme, and it's not easy to overcome. Even when we want to, it's not easy. And it's a delicate dance, and nobody did it more eloquently than Barrie. And I think he did it with just genuine charity Just, that's it. Forgiveness and grace and kindness. And sometimes I think we have been trained to add such fire into the debate that there's a rift in relationship. And you know who suffers from that? Everybody else that needs to hear the broader message. That's a crime, right? And so I think Barrie's great testimony is this legacy not only of the deposit, it is a great repository of scientific information, but it bears witness to a disposition of the heart, which is one of hospitality and grace. And this is what I learned from Barrie. And I'm deeply touched just remembering his ways. And oh gosh, I'm sure we could all go on and share our stories. I always wondered what Barrie would have to say. I quote him a lot. Here's one line. It's Sherlock Holmes. He liked to use this one, and it goes something like this. Once you've eliminated all that is impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Barrie used that to suggest the conclusion that the shroud is authentic. I've often used that same reasoning to argue all the way to the resurrection. He and I didn't see eye to eye on that, but we could still be friends. Thanks for listening. Joe, is this something we can open up for a larger discussion? And I think
we got about 15 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe I'll call upon it. There's others that here in this room know Barrie so intimately, I feel small being the one representative, but please. Yes, ma'am.
I did not know Barrie Schwortz well. I'm a child of a Polish father and a Slovak mother. I grew up in an immigrant household. You can smell the soup. You know that there's a history of both agony and joy and love and pain. And I can feel that household. I can feel that kitchen. And I wrote to Barrie over the years, and he always answered my questions completely and in a model of academic discourse. And one day I asked him the question, and I was simply curious. I was not evangelizing. And I said, you believe it's authentic, but you're not a Christian. And he said, Danusha, we're going to have to talk on the phone about this one. And I have phone phobia. I'm like literally afraid to talk on the phone. And I was like, okay, and I sat on my couch and I tried to feel brave because I was going to be talking on the phone to someone I've never met. And he called me up, and we never got around to answering that question. But on that couch, talking to him, child of Polish, Jewish, immigrant parents, child of Polish, Catholic, immigrant parents, I felt that kitchen that I grew up in. I felt so comfortable. The time passed, and it's one of the warmest phone conversations I've ever had.
Yes, that's a great testimony to Barrie. Beautiful. Yeah. I just want to share his words, because this is a question that would often come. There are two things that he said. One was super funny, that when Christians would be concerned for his own salvation, right, and be like, but you don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah? And he's like, don't worry, I'm not dead yet. That's the first thing he would say. But he would also say this in response to, is it the proof of the resurrection? I have his words here translated in Italian, but I'll translate freely here. He says, the response to a question of faith is not in a piece of cloth, but more probably in the eyes and in the heart of the one who looks, the one who looks upon it. And that was always his perspective, right? That that was a question of faith, and so it needed to be responded not with a scientific response or a syllogistic one, but with the heart. Yes, sir.
I didn't always agree with Barrie, but he also influenced me.
Bob?
Oh, sure. I asked Barrie about if he had done anything about the Guadalupe image, and he was unimpressed. And I asked him also about the coins over the eyes, and he said, I think something's on the eyes, but they could be pot shards.
There could be pot shards, yeah.
Yeah. But there was one thing he did influence me on. I told him, I said, when in my Shroud lectures, I'd been using the veil of Manipello because Paul Batty wrote a good book about it and how he thought it might have been placed above the face on top of the shroud. And that Christ. But I said, Barrie, that thing bothers me. I don't like the lips. I don't like the teeth. And he said, Bob, look at the eyebrows. And I looked at the eyebrows and they were combed in reverse. It's impossible. No human being's ever had eyebrows like that. So that convinced me, aside from my own misgivings, but I did go to Manipello anyway and got up right next to it. And I, for those of you who wonder why there wasn't a Manipello talk here, I believe there really was a veil like that, but it was lost and destroyed. And it's just possible that it was a copy so people knew what it would look like. And maybe he reversed the eyebrows so you would know which one was the copy.
Okay. Yeah, you're reminding me of something that Barrie would often say, that he had a great way of kind of packaging in like a little nugget a great truth, you know? And he had this one, he would say, I think I see is not science, right? And so there are plenty of these, I think I see. And Paolo Di Lazzaro, the physicist I mentioned earlier, really latched onto that. He has some great publications on the phenomenon of pareidolia. Pareidolia is when you look at some amorphous shape like a cloud or, I don't know, the pan after you made your grilled cheese sandwich or the tiles on the bathroom floor, and you project faces or words especially, maybe it's ships or rope on the shroud. People are very creative in all the things they saw. And so that really needs to be developed. There's so much excess. But you're getting to a point that I think is something that was very dear to Barrie, is that we needed to have a scholarly consensus, and we needed to have argumentation that reached to the level of demonstration. And every pet theory is not created equal. And so he wanted the conversation so that there could be a kind of collective discernment for what is held to be true. We can't be perfect, especially in the realm of interpretation. It's not syllogistic. It's not necessary. It's not apodictic. It's not inescapable most of the time. But where there's a consensus, that's important, right? We need to be able to know that. And so I think it was in hot pursuit of that. And when he was wanting to publish, and I felt so honored that after just one semester with him, and we had to do a final paper, he selected a few of them to be showcased on Shroud.com. So there was a section for like philosophy and religion, and not everything was, you know, up to snuff with like what Bob Rucker and Paolo Di Lazzaro and Giulio Fanti and Manuele Marinelli and so many others here are publishing. I was just a fledgling seminarian, and he published my paper. But he was able to put that in a category that says, okay, this isn't in the same kind of echelon, but it can still be shared. And it wasn't even his faith, but he was happy to put that up there. But I think this kind of sifting we would use in our Pontifical University often as a point of reference, a great work many of you know, The Critical Summary by Dr. John Jackson and company, right, that kind of enumerates the different subject matters and then tries to summarize what are the main conclusions. And so we can kind of distinguish, well, what's at the skeletal level, and then what's branching off of that, maybe going out on a limb in a way that's still yet to be seen. But what was science and what was opinion? right? That kind of discernment Barrie was very keen to explore and to do it not alone, but with peer review. That was a word that was constantly on his lips. Peer review, and it wasn't even to the point of if he was something that he published, one of his pictures, if for some reason it wasn't up to his criteria, whoa, watch out. He was not going to promote something that he didn't think was intellectually honest, even when it was to the detriment of his own pocketbook, right? And so that was Barrie, I think, just a real integral, just with a heart after integrity. And that's great. That's a great quality of his. Oh, you got the microphone. Sorry, Bill.
Thanks. I had a unique relationship with Barrie because I am a Messianic Jew. So I would, to put it nicely, confront him about his faith, which I was trying to not call him a hypocrite. How can you be a Shroud advocate and not believe that Jesus was resurrected and do not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but you're always telling people that you are Jewish and you're using that as part of your shtick and give you really credibility of like, I'm a Jew, but that's code for I don't believe in Jesus, but yet I'm here talking about the man of the shroud is in fact Jesus, who is a Jew. So we have this interesting relationship. And I would always ask him throughout the years, I'd say, how's your faith walk going? And he would always say, I'm getting there. And this went on for years.
Yeah.
And I never stopped asking him that question. And then one day he actually revealed to me that he really believed that because he was going to be a traitor to his faith because his mother was a Polish immigrant. And he just had this guilt of that if he believed in Jesus as the Messiah, as resurrected Christ, somehow he was insulting the memory of his mother. So he was always struggling with that. But about 6 months before he died, he and I had a conversation. And again, I asked the question, how's the faith walk going, Barrie? Because I knew he was sick. And same thing. He says, I'm getting there. Okay, so then today, Russ told me something which I thought was very interesting. So here's Russ Brio.
Okay, thanks for that intro, Myra. I always accuse Barrie of being more of an enigma than the shroud itself. The mother part I never got because he was the one who told the story. He took his mom to a lecture and she was in the back of the car and quiet and he didn't understand why she was so quiet. And he says, "Well, what did you think, Mom?" And his mother says, "Well, of course it's authentic, Barrie. They wouldn't have kept it that long." So I don't know what he felt about his mother, why he felt that she wouldn't have accepted it. But anyways, I called Barrie about a week prior to his passing, and for a year or more, I knew he was struggling with back pain, and he didn't realize it at the time that his kidneys were shutting down, and the reason his kidneys were shutting down was because he had leukemia, and so he wasn't treating the leukemia or his kidneys. So he finally checks into the hospital and he's getting chemo for leukemia. He's on dialysis for his kidneys. And he does this for maybe a couple weeks, and he says, I'm not doing this anymore. And he basically made a decision to pull himself off all of those life supports. And he said, I'm just gonna go naturally at home. Well, he never made it home. So I called him about a week after he had disconnected everything. I called him about a week before he passed, and he said, he explained how he had made this kind of a decision. I said to him, "Well, Barrie, I guess when it's time to go, it's time to go." And I said to him, "Well, let me just ask you this: have you made peace with the man on the shroud?" And he said this to me: "Russell, what else could I do?" And I think that's about as much of an affirmation of faith as you're ever going to get.
Okay. Well, I wanted to share a story in that direction too. Thanks, Russ and Myra, for that, because I often challenged Barrie too. Sometimes taking him to the airport I'd press him on these questions quite directly. Because although he did often claim his Jewish heritage, when I'd grill him on the Old Testament, you could find his limits to his understanding and his readiness to respond. But at the same time, his approach was that, yes, we can say that it's Jesus, but it's a whole other question to ask, is that Jesus risen from the dead? And is he the Messiah? Is he the Son of God? And so with the question of the image on the shroud, the way he would take it up is to say, today we don't know the means by which it's made, but maybe tomorrow we will. So he was clinging to the hope that there would be a naturalistic explanation to the formation of the image that wouldn't necessarily require something like a resurrection, even if today we held it. But what I would try to point out to him, this was my argument just to see how he would relate to it, was, but do we have any evidence of that, Barrie? Do we have any reason to believe that it's a merely naturalistic cause? And I think there he was honest about saying, not yet, so no is for the time being no. And so that was a kind of blind faith that I think he had. I think that was a limit. I'm pretty sure that now he knows that, all right? But I think, just having made peace with the man in the shroud, maybe God fills in the gaps there. We reserve judgment, right, about that. But he reminds me very much of C.S. Lewis in this regard. This is from a Catholic perspective. Take it with a grain of salt, right? For those who are not coming from a Catholic perspective, try to understand my point, even if you might disagree with some particulars. C.S. Lewis had lots of friends who were Catholic. C.S. Lewis brought many of the broader Christian world into close proximity to Catholicism, even though he never became Catholic himself. So I've always looked at that from my perspective, again, please take it with some grace if you're not Catholic, as a great compliment to him, that he should be entrusted with a mission that lifts everybody up, even if it doesn't reach what I would regard as the fullness. His mission did serve the greater body. I think Barrie's mission was analogous to that. I think even though he didn't come all the way as some of us would have liked, he was always in hot pursuit of the truth. I think we could all say with sincerity, he was a truth seeker. And I remember what Jesus had to say about that. Seek and you will find, right? Knock and it'll be open to you, right? And so I like to hope that that Barrie found the one he was looking for.
I know we have a lot of other people who would like to speak up, but it's really time to stop. And we thank Father Andrew for his presentation.